I'm the executive director of SKATEBUD, a nonprofit that does skateboard advocacy and accessibility. And I'm joined today by Nick Katz, owner of Andrew Downtown and an influential force behind the existence of Lock 11, and Irene Bauza from Street Plans. She's an urban planner with a lot of insight on the intersection of municipal spaces and, let's say, people's ideas of how those spaces could be used. Um, Thank you to Nada for giving us the space to have this conversation. Yeah, shout out to W in the house. Um, so this talk today is an attempt to really quantify and specify a lot of things that are happening right now that I think a lot of people are affected by, but probably not that many people know. Because skateboarding, much like marijuana 10 years ago, is coming out of the shadows. And it's becoming something that is institutionalized and an accepted part of society. Whether we look at the Olympics and the fact that you see gold medalists standing on the podium holding skateboards and holding gold medals, or whether you look at a children's toy store and you see that so many of the toys are coming equipped with skateboards, or you look at children's cartoons and you see so many cartoons involving skateboards. We're at a moment where skateboarding is going from something that was criminalized and maybe implicitly criminal to being not only accepted but also a celebrated part of society. And that really matters when it comes to public architecture. And the only real existence of public architecture that has to do with skateboarding historically in the United States has been skate parks. What's happening right now is we're at a moment where our ideas of public spaces are really changing. That's what Irene is really able to speak to. And we're at a time when skateboarding is shifting and becoming much more open to the ideas of working with municipalities and institutions to create public spaces. And Nick can really speak to that. So we're going to start this conversation with a specific part of Miami's history, the Klaus Oldenburg, and what's the first name of Van Bruggen? Fuji Van Bruggen. Yeah, sorry, that's a lot of name butchering right there. But you may know it as the drop slice with peels, or drop bowl with peels and slices, or the orange peels simply. Right? It's a piece of public architecture and public art that is world renowned and recognized and part of art history. It's also owned and operated by the county, and it costs a lot of money to repaint it and resurface it. And it's also a destination for skaters. And there's nothing about this sculpture that says you can't skate here, and there's nothing about the sculpture that says you can skate here. So I think that's probably the best starting point for this conversation. And why don't we start with Nick? Could you tell us, in your experience, like being in Miami for so long, being involved in having a real idea of what's important to the local skate community, why is the orange peels important?
Well, I think the orange peels, you have to give it some context. So in the early '80s, from like 1984 to 1986, the city of Miami did like a very robust arts and public places project where they hired Issa Miyaguchi, Klaus Oldenburg, Andrew Shea, amongst an additional smattering of very famous contemporary artists to come to Dade County and do kind of transit-oriented public art as well as public art in public institutions. So like the Downtown Miami Library has a famous piece by Edward Shea. Klaus Oldenburg sits at the steps of that same structure, Government Center. And that was all kind of part of this larger revitalization project to bring not only transit to Miami, but also arts and culture. The Klaus Oldenburg sculpture, Orange Peels or Broken Cereal Bowl, think was finished in 1986 or 1988, and it's one of those kind of bizarre architectural happy accidents for skaters, at least. Um, there is these kind of pieces of this large scale blown up broken cereal bowl that kind of have these concave portions to them that lend themselves really kind of well and naturally to skateboarding. It almost looks like quarter pipes and like small teacups where you can kind of like ollie your skateboard in and get launched out of them. So as skateboarding evolved and street skateboarding kind of came across the United States from California, the Orange Peels became a site for skateboarding, probably to the chagrin of the security guards at Government Center. But it's something that I've been skating since I started skateboarding when I was like 10 years old or 11 years old. It sits right at the foot of the main transit stop. So I grew up in the suburbs of Miami, South Miami, and downtown Miami represented kind of the mecca of skateboarding. It's where all like the street skateboarding spots were. So you had Bayfront Park that had 7 stairs, and it had the famous triangle sculpture, which is another happy accident architecturally for skateboarding, and all these kind of ledges and steps and bank buildings. And so when I was a kid, I used to take the Metro bus to the Metro Rail. I would do it every single weekend with all my friends, and we would all kind of coalesce in downtown Miami, and there was hundreds of skaters that had taken the Tri-Rail. They'd built the Tri-Rail that went from the Tri-County area all the way up to Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, kids from Hialeah, and it was kind of this coalescence of kids just taking over the streets, and there was horse-mounted cops that used to come and kick us out and arrest us and take our boards, and it was just this kind of weird derelict rat race of skaters and then security guards. But the Orange Peels is right there when you get off the train, so it naturally became this kind of hub where everybody met up first before they got on the next train to take it to Bayfront Park. And now that piece of art sits 1 block from where I eventually would build Lot 11, and I picked that spot very intentionally because of those memories I had of being able to skate something so close to my first the train stop. And I wanted there to be a lot of accessibility for kids who didn't have a car, especially in a city that doesn't have the most robust transit system. So Government Center represents kind of the heart with the ventricles for the entirety of the transit system. So you have Tri-Rail now that goes there, you have Brightline now, you have the Metro Rail, you have the Metro Bus, you have all the kind of circulator buses in Miami that have been kind of filling in the gaps for people to move around the city. And being 1 block away from that was very important because I didn't have, that system was so important to me. The Orange Peels is still to this day skated. I mean, it appears in every single time there's a skate video and there's a trip to Miami with a skate team from out of town. It appears in one of those videos, and there's always kind of constant evolution of people's tricks that get done on it. You can drop in on it, you can grind off the side of it, you can go up it and do flip tricks. The best skaters in the world have skated it, from Ryan Sheckler to Andrew Reynolds to Daewon Song. And I think now, it being so close to the skate park, the pro teams they come to the skate park to warm up, and it's like the eventual first stop before they head into kind of the downtown corridor and start skating. So if you go there now, it's funny, there's kind of a contest of who can get the highest sticker slap onto the top of the, and I mean, they go high, it's fucking crazy, but
yeah, I think there's
also the bust ability, the bust fact. So in skateboarding, this thing called a bust, which means when you go somewhere, how hot the spot is, how much security or cops are on the scene.
So the stickers actually came up when we were planning this panel. We were hoping to get a public arts official from the county to come and speak, and that was one of the big complaints, and the complaint came with the caveat that the value of skating is recognized in all of this, but that it creates a real friction point for the county as the administrator of this piece of art. And I was wondering, maybe Irene, if you can kind of speak to that in your dealings with trying to navigate the types of spaces that Nick is describing, where it's a public space, it's this piece of surrealist art that disrupts the huge grid of modernism taking place behind it, and it's become a gathering point for so many people who don't really have another gathering point. And then you're trying to push and get the county to accept that. I think in your work you've had a lot of similar interactions. What do you think are the complications that arise when this situation comes from planning, right? But no one planned for that to happen.
Yeah, so I think, as an outsider, I'm a non-skater. As an outsider, I've always seen skateboarding as this sort of thing that's maybe tolerated in some spaces and shunned in others because it's, either desecrating public property or, pieces of art, or it's disorderly, or, there's issues with liability and so on and so forth. So I think, maybe that's starting to change a little bit in recent years. And I think cities, there's a really great opportunity for cities to start, leveraging the value that skateboarding brings to public spaces, which is activating them and bringing them to life. I think skateboarders or, skateboarding has this ability to take unused or neglected spaces and sort of transform them into these creative hubs for, like-minded people to interact and create social interaction. And that's something that cities, struggle with a lot. In our work, we're recently just working with the city of West Palm Beach. They have this beautiful, very large waterfront park, which is great for, large public events. They have the boat show that's held there 4 days a year, but they really struggle with how to activate it, on a daily basis with passive use. So I think skateboarding is a really, really great opportunity that cities can leverage. I think it's a project for public spaces that has this really great definition about what public spaces are and, all the qualities that public spaces have. And they have this principle called the lingering effect. And it says that great public spaces are characterized by the presence of people remaining when they don't really have a reason to stay. So I think skateboarding really represents that.
Yeah, I think what you're mentioning, it really describes a lot of the ways that we're left to utilize these spaces as the users, right? As I mentioned earlier, it's you see this grid of modernism where you have buildings that are constructed through standards that were only made possible at the turn of the century when people were also exploring somewhat radical ideas at the time about creating more organized spaces. And then the art introduces this element of it's not disorganization, right? Because the actions of the skaters are so organized, but it's unanticipated. And I wonder how in this moment when so many aspects of the operations of a city or a county are coming not under scrutiny but under review as how can we do things different, whether it's through the injection of capital, like when we saw after COVID so many cities got money for building parks and for creating ways for people to be outside. And I wonder at this time, maybe Nick, this is a good point for you to jump back in because of your success with Lot 11. What is it that helps a city go from, hey, we have this unexpected, unanticipated outcome that is hard for our police department to handle, that operationally doesn't make sense, that goes against our insurance protocol, that has our risk managers in an uproar. Really, it throws such a massive wrench into the scheme. What are some of the things that have been effective? I think both of you can probably speak to this. In these moments like this, how do you have a productive outcome and not have it resolve to, yeah, we were stupid to even think we could turn that into something beneficial?
How familiar are you with Miami?
I mean, pretty familiar.
Well, I don't think. I mean, I was here during COVID. I don't necessarily. I also sit on the DDA, which is the Downtown Development Authority. Right now we're on the footsteps of the Omni CRA, which is a community redevelopment association. It sits right directly across the street from here. And there was this Build Back Better money that got sent down to the state from the feds, and then that money got sent down to the Dade County, and then ultimately to the city of Miami. The mayor of Dade County, Daniela Levine Cava, did something that was kind of unprecedented. She actually released the funds, these federal funds, directly to City of Miami, and then that money got disseminated to the different commissioners, and those commissioners all sit on these different city redevelopment authorities and blah blah. But in that process, while I was here, I didn't necessarily see an entire injection of capital into City of Miami public spaces. I think what people neglect about Miami and Florida is, I go to discussions all the time about green space, right? So we have these two beautiful parks that sit on Biscayne Bay, and there's a lot of kind of like crusaders for green space, but what we actually have here in Miami is beige space, which is Miami Beach. And we have one of the largest linear parks in the United States that goes from Government Cut all the way to Sunny Isles Beach. And I think the culture of Miami doesn't necessarily happen on grass fields with banyan trees hanging over them. It really does occur on the sand. And I've always kind of like battled against that in my pursuit of essentially a public park. But I don't know, hardscape park. It's not a green space. I think that what I've seen is that there's intentions for new public spaces. The federal government gave the state of Florida money to expand the transit system in Miami, and it was actually misappropriated by the former governor. He denied the public transit expansion, and he actually gave the money to the Florida Department of Transportation to rebuild the highway that sits right behind us and build what's known as the Signature Bridge Project, which is actually just an aesthetics bridge that holds no architectural value other than just a beautiful architectural space. But beneath that space will be a 30-acre swath of land that they're now currently trying to figure out at the county level how to turn that into what would be the largest linear park in Dade County's history. Other than, I guess, now the underline. But that project, it's funny because it was kind of a use it or lose it scenario. The governor of the state of Florida said, "Hey, you have $850 million. I'm not going to allow you to use it on expanding the Metro Rail line. You have to either use it for building new highways, or you lose the money and I'll reallocate it anyway." So obviously, in the general wisdom, they took the money and they've started this project that, for anybody who lives here, has become a nuisance. And while we're excited for what it's going to be in the future, the finish date keeps getting pushed and pushed and pushed. Let me know if I'm getting off topic here. But,
well, yeah, let's jump back to, you've had a tremendous success, right? Working with not only the county, but
all this to say, Dade County and the city of Miami are not very good at building public spaces for our citizens. Our tax dollars are often, the parks are often neglected in that calculation for quality of life. And I think that there's a lot of people, good people in this community, and a lot of young people that are pushing for that to happen.
So I think that's the perfect circle back around, right? Because what I see is that these opportunities to create skate spaces and re-envision skate architecture is an opportunity to change our societies, because they don't function in the way that traditional parks do. They offer services and an engaging time to people who maybe are the exact people who are not served by more traditional parks. And I think you've had a tremendous success in getting Lot 11 built and navigating this space. So I was hoping maybe you could just speak to a little bit of what you find has been beneficial, but maybe this is a good point for Irene to jump in, and then that way it'll kind of temper the question a bit, because you've, that's the in and out of your everyday, is taking situations, saying, hey, this is a street designed for cars. We want to make it for people. right? Like that's basically a fight. So then, how does that fight get resolved productively?
Yeah. So as an urban planner, I think we all know that there's many challenges that come with implementing any sort of public space project or capital project. Be it funding issues or regulatory issues or political will, so many things. And I think maybe there's like probably no perfect solution, but there are many things that can be done. This what we're doing now, like advocacy and raising awareness is one thing. For the example that you just mentioned, for years, like cyclists and pedestrians have been advocating for more resources for them. For a very long time, street planning was mostly focused on moving as many cars as possible, as fast as possible. And now, in recent years, we're starting to see how cities are starting to adapt their landscapes to sort of integrate more active use, more modes or active modes of transportation. So, for example, in Miami Beach, you see how streets are being retrofitted to add in bike lanes, or worldwide, there's like a lot of cities implementing Vision Zero plans to improve pedestrian safety. So, it is a slow process, this sort of like advocacy, but it does work, and eventually I think it will lead to maybe, municipalities or cities engaging in conversations with representatives from the skateboarding community.
What about in your experience, can you speak to like a specific time when your organization is coming in and advocating for something that there's maybe no precedent, and then it's hard at first, and then it works out, it resolves positively. Like ultimately they say, yeah, we're going to do this.
I mean, all the time. Like a lot of our projects are mostly transportation-based projects. So we come in and we did something in Culver City, California last year, where we came in and implemented a very big. It was like a 1.3 mile long shared use path. So we took one lane of traffic in each direction, and we implemented a shared bus lane and bike lane. And we had a lot of supporters, a lot of people for active transportation, but we did have a lot of people, against it. So even though it did generate like some support, and it did, create this community of people that were for this type of change, we did have a lot of political backlash, and it eventually, because of the new council that came in, it eventually got taken down because it just wasn't, wanted by this new, wave of political representatives.
And I think that's the reality, right? Is that nothing that's taking place in this space is going to be like a solve-all, like a silver bullet, and all of a sudden now everything has changed and there's no more need for advocacy. And maybe that's a good point for you to jump back in, Nick, and share, like, as you were working to get to Lot 11, was there any point where things hit a blockade and you were like, oh man, I don't know if we'll make it past, and then you actually did?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of them. I would say probably more blocks than, Lot 11 took me almost 10 years to accomplish. I started in 2011, kind of, sort of, the seed of the idea. I built like a DIY park. I came back to Miami from California in 2010, and I'd experienced this kind of like do-it-yourself skate park movement in Long Beach, California. That was actually really successful. It's a place called Cherry Park, and I remember skating there, and all these pros would show up all the time. Jeff Rowley, Mark Appleyard, Ed Templeton, and I remember and it was just like ledges that were built at Home Depot with like cinder blocks. And I remember being like, yo, this is kind of crazy. They just gave them this like kind of 6,000 square foot plot of paved concrete, and all of a sudden it like activated the skate community in this huge way, in kind of a robust enough way that the skaters I grew up watching and idolizing, the skaters that are in Tony Hawk Pro Skater, were there, like skating right beside me. So when I came back to Miami, I kind of decided to put a project like that together, and that became kind of the launch pad for what ultimately would become Lot 11. I have no nonprofit experience, I have no city planning experience, I have no project management experience. But when I built Grand Central Park, I saw this incredible attendance of skaters for virtually nothing. It was the same. It was a copycat of Cherry Park. It was these ledges that were built out of cinder blocks, and I built a mini ramp, and all of a sudden, I built this thing, once again, close to a transit line, the Overtown station, and it like exploded. overnight, and there was hundreds of kids there every day to school, day in, day out, and that's kind of how I got, I guess, a little bit of notoriety or kind of attention, and then I began to kind of meet people in the political sphere here in Miami, and the idea of maybe advocating for a permanent skate park project, kind of began to come into my head. And I was in art school at the time. I was really inspired by a guy named Theaster Gates, who's an incredible artist from Chicago, and he makes pottery, he makes found object sculptures, he makes paintings. He's one of the most incredible living artists, and one of his tenets of his art practice was placemaking. In the south side of Chicago, he would buy buildings and he would rehab them all by himself, putting his own money that he made from his art shows into these buildings, and he would turn them into kind of like cultural spaces. He built a black archive for film. He built with a viewing room. He built a library. He's now built, I think, a listening room with all of Frankie Knuckles' like entire anthology. He has a coffee shop. I mean, it's crazy what the guy's done. He's created a mill for old trees that come down during development, and then he uses the scrap wood to burn to make pottery for his restaurant. He's an amazing guy. But I took that to my professor and I said, "Is placemaking art?" And she said to me, I mean, I guess you're making a case for it if this guy is contextualizing it in this way. So I used that Grand Central project as my thesis, as kind of a large-scale art piece in a way. I mean, conceptually it was. I don't think it's not like purchasable or anything like that. And then I kind of got on the road, the difficult road. One of the most difficult things I think I've ever done in my entire life. And what I think I learned through the process is that I had kind of myself and my two partners, Danny and Richie, we had kind of a relentless hunger to get this project done. And it was not done, like, this wasn't something that the city of Miami was like, we need to build a skate park and you guys are the skate experts. How can we help? It actually had there was zero political will for a skate park. Zero. Zip, zilch, nada. And this was a completely privately forged project between three individuals with a small nonprofit that kind of had to navigate the resistance, I would say, from a very kind of conservative city for what you were saying earlier, like a sport that's so in the shadows and counterculture. And we did it step by step, and we met people that kind of shared our vision. First, it was the Miami Parking Authority. I was really obsessed with this idea of taking spaces that were underutilized, and real estate in Miami-Dade County is incredibly expensive, especially in the urban core. They have these huge air rights agreements that allow for most things in our zone, in certain zoning in downtown Miami, you can go up to 80 stories. So those air rights for flat land is incredibly valuable because you have to multiply that by 80. If you're going to buy a plot of land that price per square foot is whatever, it's $6 million. You X that by 80, and now you have a project cost. So I started thinking about those lots underneath the highway, and I had obviously seen that be successful in other cities. It's, in Portland, Oregon, with Burnside and JFK, and
I think what you're touching on now is interesting, right? Because it's describing what happens with skateboarding at the individual level, at a kind of institutional level. A skateboarder comes in and reutilizes a space and says, hey, this was not intended for skateboarding, but this architecture really works for us. And the exact way that the city or the county operates, although it's serving the individuals and the community, it's saying, here's the structures, fit within these structures, make it work for you. And then this is saying, no, here's something outside of all that. This is what people need.
I had to prove it. I mean, I had to go. I remember walking into the offices, cold walking into the offices of the Miami Parking Authority, and asking to meet with the CEO at the time, who's now actually the city manager of City of Miami, Art Noriega. And he, you know, I think that he had gotten kind of caught when we were on the cover of the neighbor section of the Miami Herald for Grand Central, and I remember walking into his office and saying, "Hey, this is our project. We had a small deck. We're looking for a lot of this size. You know, we understand that you guys are in control of these lots underneath the highway. Does this project in any way entice you?" And I remember him saying, you know, those lots for us are actually they actually cost us money. They don't make us money because the threshold between the highway, between downtown Miami, where all the municipal buildings, and what's known as Riverside, has for decades been plagued by by crime, homelessness, prostitution, drug sales. And so these lots, nobody wanted to park in them. They're kind of dark, and they're away from you'd have to walk to get to Government Center or go shopping, and to walk back at night is like very scary. I wouldn't recommend it even today. But I remember saying to him, what value do these things have to you? And he was like, very little to none. And honestly, we're the parking authority. We're the most demonized organization in the city of Miami. We give people tickets. Everybody hates us. We're actually looking for a project to kind of give back to the city and to kind of like build some more goodwill with our customers, which are the people that pay their fees, the parking fees. And he was like, this kind of is coming at a perfect time. We would love to like partner with you on this. But he was like, look, you have to convince the Florida Department of Transportation, because we don't own these lots. We lease them. And they're cool with us leasing them for parking, but this thing that you're talking about is kind of a radical idea, especially there's not one organization in the United States that's more conservative thinking than a transportation authority. It is strictly engineers that do not know how to bend any rules, that stick to the plan.
Maybe Irene, you can add a little color here in not just in terms of transportation, but also that kind of stratification of, you start talking to a person who controls this piece of property that works in the city, and now they're telling you to go and talk to someone in the county who tells you to talk to someone in the state.
I mean, I think you've just described it. I think for all of our projects, we work mostly in transportation, but for all of our projects, I think that's like the biggest challenge is, even though we have the mayor who's for the project and it's a community that really wants this project, then we have to go to the DOT and convince them to let us do a certain thing, because they've never seen it and it's not written in their manual that's made for designing highways. So it's really tough. I think that is definitely one of those challenging things.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that comes up with skate architecture and skate spaces over and over again. I think the thing that's really unique that is starting to happen in this window that's open is that because skateboarding is in the Olympics and because there is so much institutional recognition, is that it almost can be a point of leverage in a positive way where it used to be negative. Can you think of anything that you deal with? Because I feel like bikes are on a similar trajectory, right? Where I can remember a time when critical mass taking place was viewed as tremendously criminal, and friends who I had who just rode bikes around town as a mode of transportation would have things thrown at them and comments from drivers. What do you think in regards to biking? Do you see any parallels to skateboarding in the ways that it's maybe coming into it's coming under a different kind of recognition institutionally?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I said this before, skateboarding, I think, as an outside, from an outsider's perspective, has evolved, from the sort of nuisance, like you say, into something that creates, activity and activates space and creates opportunities for, people from maybe underserved communities to come and, integrate themselves within society. So I think it's definitely, at least to my personal eye, it's definitely a positive thing. I think it's up to people like us to keep advocating for it to become seen that way for in the larger eye.
And do you still see that with when you're talking to someone about bikes? Is there that pushback of like, I don't know, bikes, they might not be good?
There's always communities that, at least people that only drive and they don't want their parking spaces taken away. There's always going to be people that are against this project, and you just need to focus on the people that do want it and push for them to really advocate for these things to happen.
I would say on the point of biking, I mean, you have to think, biking is a ubiquitous type of action. Billionaires bike, people that, the homeless bike, it definitely has more widespread ubiquity and acceptance as something that is used. I mean, obviously people do it for sport, but at the same time people do it for transportation. Skateboarding, I don't think has that ubiquitous kind of context. And I can walk into a politician's office and say, "Do you have a bike in your garage?" And they probably 100% of the time is going to say, "Yes, I actually love to cycle," and like whatever. Me and my buddies on the weekend, we get in spandex and we go to the bike down to Key Biscayne. But when it comes to skateboarding, they're really the only connections I've ever seen, the ones that have helped me along this road to creating Lot 11, which were many of them, and I could go on and name people nobody here knows, but it always has to do with their children, or it has to do with some bygone era of their life where they had a skateboard in like the 80s, and that's the only attachment they have to it. I remember my first real advocate from a monetary standpoint when I went to the city of Miami to get some funding for Lot 11. Once we had kind of passed the hurdles of securing the space with the FDOT and all of these things, that had all happened, and I had gotten 50% of the kind of project under my belt. The next part was funding it. I went to tons of sponsors, and it was, son, we don't invest in paper. This is a vision, but maybe when it's done, we can give you a sponsorship deal or whatever. I remember going into Francis Suarez, who's the current mayor of Miami now. At the time, he was a commissioner, and he had spent a vacation in Portugal, in Lisbon, and he stayed at a hotel that was right across the street from the Malecon, and they had built a skate park there, and his kids got obsessed with it. Their hotel window, which obviously looks out into this beautiful Mar Vista. The kids didn't care about that. All they cared about was the noise of the skateboards, and they wanted to go down every morning and watch the kids skate. And when I walked into his office, he told me that anecdote. He was like, it changed my perspective on skateboarding, and it changed my perspective on how much people like to watch it and how people want to kind of be in that space and spectate on it, even if they're not a part of it. And he was like, it was amazing, like, use of public space. And he was the first guy to say yes. He said yes. And then I went to the next commissioner, whatever, down the line, and it was kind of this domino effect. But I remember seeing that, and it was like, for other people in Miami, they had never seen skate parks work before. So you have to travel all the way to Portugal and have your kids drag you out of bed in the morning and say, Daddy, I want to go watch the skateboarders, for you to kind of finally,
right, I think,
for that switch to flip in your head to say, okay, maybe this kid across the table from me has a decent idea that I can support.
Yeah, I think skateboarding, you just said something really interesting. Skateboarding is at this intersection of so many aspects. It's at the intersection of transportation and recreation and public space. So I think you have something, right, which is knowing who to appeal to and with what sort of aspect.
Yeah, I didn't know it. It's another funny story. One of the commissioners at the time was this guy named Willie Gord. He was like a career politician, sat on the city commission for many years. Older guy, Alapata, very old, established Latino, like Alapata neighborhood guy, and he said he told me I have no idea. I have no. He's in his 60s. He's like I don't skateboarding. He's like I grew up in Cuba. There was no skateboards in Cuba. I don't know anything about this, but I grew up weightlifting, and I used to compete as a bodybuilder, and I kind of see the similarity. Like there's no like, coach telling you what to do. You kind of get to do it your own way. You know, I used to go into the gym and I'd pick my workouts, and you guys go out in the streets and you pick your tricks. So it kind of makes a little sense to me. And I remember being like, okay, there's like a crack in the door that I can like exploit here. And I was like, hey, like, you know, exactly. And we'll build an outdoor gym for you. Anything you want. Like, I just need you to give me this, just support me on the dais when this thing comes up for vote. And I remember finding those things that appeal to each person, because those are really the people that are standing between you and a project being successful. And I had to schmooze, and I had to convince. And in my head, it was a no-brainer. It's like, I can take this big problem for you guys, you know, street skateboarding. The police have to deal with it. The property owners, they're destroying everything, and I can put them all in one place. And they won't bother anybody. And it's right next to the police station. You guys can police it. And I built this like utopic idea that solved all these problems for them. And all of a sudden, it started to gain that momentum. But that was year like 7 into the project, and I was so beaten down by it. You know, no. Oh, you're outside of the district. We can't fund it. Oh, you're maybe, but you know, our discretionary budget doesn't cover recreation. I'm sorry, this, that. It was like every excuse, and I don't know if you guys have ever seen. This is so stupid, but there's this meme. It's like the never give up meme. It's like 2 prospectors like in a cave. It's like two like frames of it, and one is like really close to breaking through to this chamber of jewels, and he's walking away from it like he gives up, and the other guy's like hard at work, but he's got more to go. And that meme like weirdly like was so burned into my head. I always felt like I was like one meeting away, or one phone call away, or one whatever away, and if I just relentlessly pursued it forever, eventually it would happen. And I was just like, I made a commitment to myself that I would like never stop.
And I think this is probably a great point to wrap it up, but also like I do want to provide a closing remark to kind of tie some things together here. Going back to what you were talking about, Nick, with you were speaking to the commissioner who went on to become mayor, and for that commissioner, he recognized the value of skateboarding when he was in Portugal at a hotel, and his kids saw it at the skate park, and it really captivated them. I think that speaks to the fact that architecture can either be efficient or inefficient at achieving these ends. And what we have in Florida historically is terrible skate parks that segregate skateboarding out of communities and serve as bad examples of what could be accomplished, right? And we're here at the NADA Art Fair, and I think everyone can relate to the idea that you might walk into someone's home and see a Thomas Kinkade painting and say, that's no good. And you might walk into someone else's home and see an Andy Warhol painting and say, this is historic art. But at the end of the day, it's all painting, right? To the world, it's painting. And what we experience through these spaces and through architecture and through public planning and through becoming more involved is to say, instead of accepting the painting that someone else presented and said, this is the only thing you can look at, we can each get up and be involved in the creation of these spaces and have some effect on what the final outcome is. So if either of you would like to provide any additional closing remarks, I think for me, what I just wanted to tie up here is the idea that skateboarding cuts across so many ideas of art, and it can be art in so many ways that you look at it. But I do believe that when we look at it in the context of public architecture and planning, that's when it becomes the most exciting, and there's an amazing window of opportunity that's open right now.
Yeah, I think for me it's just mostly interesting that aside from, architects and designers and planners, probably skateboarders are like the next group that really know how to appreciate, how public space and architecture and public art really interact with one another.
I mean, speaking to my own experience, I mean, Lot 11, I would say, I grew up in a city that had no skate parks, and I remember when they started building the first ones, and they were really bad. They're all on the way outskirts of Dade County. There was some like weird money that came in to build these things, and they were horrible, terrible, and they were whatever. But I was like a pig in shit. I could care less. Because my community had been starved for this for so many decades. I mean, for me, I was still a kid, like in my teens, and when it came to Lot 11, I knew that if I had worked this hard to make this thing happen, my only goal was that I built one of the best skate parks in the world. And I was like adamant about this. And I meticulously designed that skate park with a guy named Tigre Portaro, where like every single aspect of it was considered. And that's, I think, what makes it so different than other cities in the world, is because this was kind of it's a public-private partnership, and it's run by a private organization that's a free amenity to the public, but it had real expertise built into it. Most skate parks are, something comes through the pipeline, they find a skate park company through a bid process, whoever says, oh, we'll do it for the cheapest, does it. I had no bid because I was doing it myself. So I picked the best builders, I picked the best designers, I imbued it with as much of my own world and skateboarding experience as I could, and I made it a point to be there every single day for 9 months to make sure that every inch between the ledges, every height of every curve, every height of every transition was exactly what I wanted. And I took a lot of consideration from other skateboarders. I mean, I remember going back and forth on the distance between the bottom of a transition and the stair set. I mean, we went over it for 3 days, where we built actually like a quarter pipe out of wood, and we all skated it. And we were like, is this gonna work? Is it another foot? And I think that really, when you work so long, or like with you, like what you were talking about with that project in Culver City, it was like maybe everybody didn't get consideration when it came to those bike lanes, right? Like they installed bike lanes outside of my shop in downtown Miami. I know for a fact that nobody uses them. And what they did was they took a lane of traffic and all the loading zones out. So now my life as a store owner is a complete nightmare. Like I can't unload my package, and it's like this like stupid bike lane that no one uses. And I cycle myself, so I understand the need for it, but it's like they almost did it just to do it, to like check this box. And no one really considered the impact of what it would do. And I guess my final remarks would be like, one, never give up on your dreams. And pursue whatever you want in life relentlessly until it happens, because it will. Ultimately, you will break through those barriers to accomplish what you want. You make 0% of the shots you don't take, and if you go for it, you keep putting up those shots, you'll eventually hit one. And also, I think that design and architecture, like you were saying, and being hypercritical of not only yourself, but also the impact that what you're building is going to have and how it's going to be received, is incredibly important. And I trusted my gut, and I knew what the city needed. And I mean, the direct impact of skateboarding, on skateboarding that Lot 11 has had in Miami and globally is beyond anything I could have ever fathomed. I mean, every skateboarder, the best skateboarders in the world, the Olympic gold medalist, Yuto Horigami, is coming this Saturday. I mean, we're flying in the world's best skateboarders in the world are here right now during Art Basel. This never happened and it would never happen if Lot 11 didn't exist. And to see that intersectionality of art and skating and all of this stuff happening, and Tiba Jefferson being able to do a photo show in Miami, not in LA, like that's crazy to me. Growing up, I would have never thought that would even be remotely possible. And like one place, one 50,000 square foot space transformed all of that in the matter of 4 years. And I think what that can do is that could be a litmus test for how transformative, spaces of whatever your guys' passions are can be. If it's rock climbing, if it's soccer, if it's playwriting, if it's whatever, you're going to begin to see, as long as there's a place for it to be done, and it's done with intention, I think ultimately the effect of it will be long lasting.
Yeah. All right. Great remarks. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you Nada for having us. And I do also have to say thank you to Ted Barrow. He was supposed to be the moderator, but he had a slight emergency at the last moment. But
That would be fun, bro.
he made a lot of contributions to the conceptual framework that we use to get this conversation going. So thanks to Ted, and thank you to all of you for coming out, and thanks again to
Thank
Nada.
you guys. I
Thank
thought I
you,
was
Nick.
really.
Thank
I
you,
thought I was
everybody.
going to speak only for a camera. So thank you for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was really nice with you. I appreciate it.